Would you continue using your copy and paste photo contracts if you knew that they were losing you thousands of dollars and potentially leaving you open to getting scammed? Well, probably not, but that's exactly what most creators are doing right now without even realizing it. So in this video, I want to show you why that's the case, but more importantly, how you can avoid it by just implementing some simple sentences into your contracts that will help you get paid on time, have clients that actually respect your terms, and most importantly, be guaranteed income before you ever start working. So let's go ahead and get started with why your current contracts are keeping you broke. And in order to illustrate this point, I'm going to tell you a little story about a resort I shot in Mexico. So it was 2021. It was just a few months before I was about to get married, which means that finances were a little tough. And I was waiting on payment not only from this resort shoot, but also like 3 other clients. Now, a little background on this shoot. Basically, they invited me out for a month to shoot. We had a predetermined project rate, but we didn't have like a certain amount of days that I was supposed to shoot or even a certain amount of deliverables. So as you can imagine, the deliverable list kind of continued to increase, as well as my shoot days. Just because I didn't have that in the terms, I also didn't have any contingency terms, meaning if they wanted to add something, like I wasn't going to charge anything extra. And to be honest, I didn't even know what half the words in the contract even meant, but I was just so stoked to do the job that I basically just signed it away. And all I knew is I was going to get paid this much and that I was going to shoot this resort in Mexico. But 3 months later, I still hadn't gotten paid. As you can probably imagine, the stress was starting to mount. And the frustrating part was I actually had a contract in place, or at least so I thought. See, because everyone was telling me to get a contract, and in fact, I knew I needed one because I had gotten burned in the past by not having a contract, but no one was telling me what this contract should actually look like. So I thought I was being smart. I basically just Googled a photography contract and downloaded like the first one that I saw. I switched out a few things to make it more relevant to my current client, but here was the problem. So what I didn't realize is that there's different types of photography contracts. So I downloaded like a wedding and portrait photography contract because that's all I could find, but it's very different than the contract that's necessary when you're shooting marketing assets for multi-million-dollar corporations. As a result, I am still waiting to this day to get paid for that gig. Definitely never will, but they're still using the assets that I shot for them 3 years ago to this day, and there's nothing I can do about it. But thank God, because one bright part about the entire story is that I did have a little bit of savings, because if I didn't have that, I would have been completely wiped out by not being able to have any income for an entire month. So I don't want that to happen to you. So I'm going to give you 5 clauses that you need to be adding to your contracts if they're not there already that will save you money and stop you from getting scammed like I was. So the first one I think is probably the most obvious one, but it's basically preventing against late payments, because honestly, most photographers go out of business because their clients won't pay them for 90 days or 6 months or something crazy, and you just can't float your entire life based off of hopefully getting paid in 90 days, let alone having to float things like production expenses or travel expenses or all these other different little fees that clients a lot of times expect photographers to float. So one way that you can mitigate this that I recommend is starting to implement a 1% interest fee for every day that the payment is late after 48 hours after it's due. So for example, a lot of clients will have like a net 30 term. So basically I'll invoice them, say on the 1st, which means that it'll be due on the 1st of the next month. Now, if it gets to the 3rd of the next month and I still haven't been paid, I will start to implement that 1% interest on the entire project fee. Plus, I'm going to send them a reminder email every single day that that interest is going up, as well as the new total and sending new invoices. And yes, this is annoying. Yes, this is also annoying for the client, but it's also extremely annoying not to get paid. So that kind of helps incentivize them. Now, one other thing you can do to actually incentivize early payments, say for example, the client says that they always do net 30. What you can do is say they do it in 2 weeks or 15 days instead of 30. You can actually incentivize that with a slight discount, like a 2% discount. And a lot of times corporations will actually be forced to prioritize the contracts where they get discounts on early payments. So that's just a little hack in terms of how you can actually get paid a little bit earlier. So this clause in a lot of ways prevents your late payments, but I don't know about you, but I don't like being my client's personal bank accounts. I don't like floating their production expenses and their travel expenses and all these things. And to be honest, you shouldn't. So this is why I implement the second clause into my photography contract, which is deposits. Now, deposits can look differently depending on your specific offer, how you work with clients, etc. So like for retainers, for example, I'll usually accept the payment at the 1st of the month, and it has to be the entire amount. So I don't really do deposits for retainers unless it's one-time production expenses or something like that. But if it's a one-time project, then I bill the client 100% of the projected production expenses plus 50% of my personal creative fee upfront before I ever start working. So to explain how this works, basically I will estimate the production expenses. So these are things like rentals, any kind of talent that you need, extra crew, travel expenses, all that kind of stuff. I'll estimate that out so that the client knows exactly how much that costs. And then I'll take 50% of my personal creative fee and I'll add that to the invoice. So they have 100% of projected expenses plus my creative fee, which basically means that I'm not paying out of pocket for anything production related. And I'm also being compensated for my my time in pre-production, any kind of logistics and planning that I have to do, as well as travel. And just to reiterate, that has to be paid upon signing, and I will not start working until that's paid. Now, sometimes clients are like, oh, we pay net 30. That's fine if you want to pay that net 30, but I will not start working until that's paid. So it'll just extend the, the production deadline. Now, the additional 50% of my creative fee plus any additional expenses plus usage are due upon delivery, which I will invoice the client, and that's, obviously due upon delivery, which brings me to the next thing that most people leave out of their contracts, which is usage. So I actually did an entire video about usage. I'll leave a link somewhere around here that you can check out, but make sure to watch the rest of this video first before you do so. But in general, usage is just charging a fee for the client to be able to use your content for a specific use case in a certain amount of time. So contrary to popular belief, just because a client pays you to shoot content for them does not mean they own the rights to do anything with the content. Actually, you as the creator own the rights. So unless you actually give them written consent in the form of a contract, they don't have any right to use your content in general. So that's why this clause is really, really important. And a lot of times what you'll see is that when clients want you to use their contract, they'll say that they have full rights or they can use it for whatever they want. And if you don't know what you're doing and you sign that away, then you kind of just gave up your rights. So in order to avoid that issue, before I even write the contract, I like to ask my clients where they want to use the content and how long they need it for. And once I understand that information, I can detail it out in the contract so everyone's on the same page in terms of where we can use it, how long it can be used for. And if anything is outside the scope of that, or I find the content being used outside of the scope that's outlined, I can either send it a cease and desist, I can send an invoice, or I have some sort of legal bounds in order to be able to enforce my contract. If I don't have that, then I don't really have any legal grounds. So those are basically the three top ways that I see creators losing money through their contracts, but there's actually two other extremely sneaky ways that you are losing money just by not having these in your contract. So the fourth thing you want to add to your contract is a revision clause. So a lot of creators get stuck in months and months of endless revisions because of this. So what I like to do instead is just specify that I can do up to 2 revisions for free, and then anything after that, I charge a certain amount per hour, which is basically my editing fee. So as an example, say I do 2 revisions, the client comes back to me, they say we need X, Y, and Z changes. What I'll do is I'll say, okay, that's fine, and I'll estimate how long that'll take me. So say, for example, those changes will take me 3 hours. I charge $75 an hour for editing. If we multiply 75 by 3, that's $225 as an estimate for how much those revisions will cost. And I'll send it to the client as a change order form, which basically details that this is changing the contract and the scope. This is what we plan to do. This is how many hours. This is the rate, and basically have a signature where they accept that that is what they are going to pay in exchange for those revisions. So once they sign that, I'll send them an invoice for however much that was that I detailed on the change order form, and they will have to pay me that invoice before I get started on those revisions. And I make sure to detail that out in the contract so everyone knows ahead of time and they're not surprised by that. And that brings me to the fifth and final thing that you need to make sure that you have in your contracts, which is a cancellation clause. So as you know, cancellation just wastes everyone's time. It wastes your time because you work on a project that is never going to happen. Waste the client's time because they have the sunk cost of talking with you on a project again that's never going to happen. So we want to avoid that at all costs. So one of the best ways that I like to do this is in my cancellation clause, I say that if the client chooses to cancel anytime between signing the contract and the final deliverables, they are liable for all 100% of the production expenses paid up until that point, and I'll provide receipts for proof of that. And then they're also liable for 50% of my creative fee, assuming that I haven't shot, or if the content has been shot already, then they're liable for 100% of that. Most of the time, cancellations are going to happen before the shoot, so you don't have to worry about that other 50%. But to clarify what I mean by the production expenses, let's say that there's $1,000 of projected production expenses. 500 of them I'm spending up front, for example, on props, talent deposits, stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, the client cancels on me. But I've already spent that $500 that they gave me on production expenses. So that would be something that the client would still owe me, and I could refund the additional 500 that hasn't been spent yet, but they would still owe me 50% of my creative fee because I've spent the time in pre-pro, logistics planning, talking to people, mood boards, all that kind of stuff. So those are the 5 things that you need to add to your photography contract. But if you want a full photography contract that's been vetted by dozens of Fortune 500 lawyers and has resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of sales for myself, for my clients, then you can get that in the Paid to Create program, but it's an invite only that you have to apply for. So if you're interested, you can check the link in the description below to apply for a free game plan call. We'll walk you through how we can implement the growth creator model to help you scale to $10,000 to even $20,000 a month with your content business while shooting for brands and resorts that you love. You also have access to obviously the contract template and all the other different systems and stuff that we use to grow our clients' businesses. So if you're interested, check the link in the description below. So now that you have a solid contract and you know what to add, it really really doesn't matter if you don't have clients to actually send the contract to, right? So if you don't have consistent clients yet, then check this video right here where I break down my entire process for client acquisition.